Well, we've gone from the sheer shock of yesterday's ICAC investigation involving the Premier of New South Wales to the political number crunching which comes when MPs smell the blood of a battered senior colleague. It's brutal stuff, but some in the government have been secretly discussing alternatives to Gladys Berejiklian. Mind you, when the party room gathered this morning, the official line was a unanimous vote of confidence in the Premier, and her apology to colleagues preceded that. But it's not every day you have a Premier being grilled in the witness box by a corruption agency using phone intercepts. And it's not every day that we discover a 5-year-long secret relationship between the Premier and one of her own colleagues. I stated yesterday that you can't help but think what a terrible misjudgment by Gladys Berejiklian to put yourself in such a conflicted position where you are privately privy to MP Daryl Maguire's dealings on some of the state's biggest projects. It is a classic conflict of interest. And more damningly, even after Maguire was forced to stand down in 2018, that relationship continued for 2 further years. And does this phone intercept in particular fall into the category of a Premier aiding her boyfriend in his pursuit to obtain permission to travel to China?
I just got home.
That's good.
Did Sarah ring you from my office?
No way.
Huh?
No way.
Oh, she sent me a text because whenever she has to ring a member of Parliament, she lets me know. Apparently Niall Blair's rung up to say, tell Daryl not to worry, I'm raising the issue on his behalf in China.
Good.
And I said, well, what's that got to do with us? And Sarah said, oh, they want us to tell him so that he doesn't go off his brain in China against all these people because the minister's promised to fix it for him.
No, but the issue is that what they've done is they've promised to raise it. They're not going to fix it.
And they seem to think it's in your electorate. I didn't say anything. I
know,
just said, let me know how it goes.
But the issue is this. So they can invite them all, have a round table, yada, yada, yada. That's fine. So what I've said is, well, I'm going anyway. I'll be there the day before. So I'll light a fire. And the problem is they're all that scared of me now, and they don't know what I'll do. So whether I'll just go feral or whatever.
I think that's what they're worried about, and I'm worried about it.
Now, by any reckoning, I would have thought that is damning. The fact that the Premier has taken information that she only knows from what's happening in the Premier's office to someone on the outside, her boyfriend and fellow MP at the time, Daryl Maguire. But her crime has not been one of corruption. None at all. As she described, it was a mistake in her private life.
Hands down, this has been one of the most difficult days of my life. I'm an extremely private person and without question, I stuffed up in my personal life and I accept that. It's very difficult for someone in my position to have a private and personal life.
Now, what some in political bubbles often ignore is that members of the public are not without mistakes, not without relationship nightmares themselves. The public has not witnessed a Premier trying to make money or overly assist her boyfriend pay off debts. Certainly that's not the case. They have now seen a woman they very much respect in love, duped, yes, by his business dealings, and someone who has been willing to front up and apologise. Now, before the knives are sharpened, before the ambitious begin their coup, and before the media start to dig deep into ministerial codes of conduct, they may wish to read and hear what voters are saying. Now, after trawling through social media feeds and talkback radio calls throughout today, I gathered that the message was loud and very clear. The Premier deserves great credit for her work as the state's leader, especially during this pandemic, and given any evidence of corruption, the overwhelming sentiment is one of support. I'd still back Gladys over the mob opposite any day with some of the comments that were made. The person who has never made a mistake has never made anything. She has more integrity in her little finger than most of them. And please leave our Premier alone. Everyone deserves a bit of love and affection as long as no laws have been broken, and I say there hasn't. Please, the media as a whole, leave her alone. She is doing a wonderful job. Now, Gladys has done and continues to do a great job for New South Wales. This tweet said, "This circus is a sideshow to the main event of getting through this virus and growing on the other side. Gladys is the best placed for that." And on talk radio, the trend is just the same.
I can't believe the stupid decisions of one minister is going to take the scalp of the best premier that we've ever had in the last, I'm 54 and I've never seen a premier that's done so much work for Sydney, New South Wales, and is making the whole country look good.
I can't believe this. She should be judged purely on her work load, what she's achieved, what she's doing, how she's achieving it, and the things that really matter.
I'm totally in support of her. She's openly said that she buggered it up.
My reading of what I saw and also what I read was that the vast majority do not want this Premier to go. And if Liberal MPs don't read that correctly, they might find themselves with a new leader, all right, and a long 4 years in opposition. We should be able to forgive our leaders. They're human. Her reputation is one of sincerity and honesty. That's why this is such a stunning shock for most in New South Wales. As for this argument about what she should have revealed about her relationship under pecuniary interests, how many other MPs put their relationships on a register? There are MPs whose wives are in other governments. They're not on the register. MPs whose husbands have criminal convictions. That hasn't been placed on any register. But those details are not expected to be. Now, was her judgment skew with? You bet it was. Will she lose some trust from the people of New South Wales? So this certainly. And of course, they'll be bashing her senseless in the Parliament for quite some time, as they began to do this afternoon.
Why, Premier, did you not
You've asked the question, Leader of the Opposition.
It is your legal responsibility.
Order.
Why did
Leader
you
of the
not
Opposition,
act?
resume your seat.
Point of order.
It went on for an entire hour. But as a voter, I value the fact that New South Wales has Australia's best Premier. Right now, we need her and we need her leadership. Let's not lose a second Premier in New South Wales on a technicality. We lost Barry O'Farrell over a bottle of wine. This time, let's do what's right for New South Wales, not give in to the opportunist screaming in the House for vengeance. You've got to give the New South Wales Premier points for facing the music. Not only did she apologise to the Liberal Party room this morning, then she faced a fired-up media contingent outside the House and then went into the bear pit and tried to handle the savagery. But what the media, some of her detractors and the Labor Party are focusing on is whether she has broken the code of ministerial conduct. Our own political editor, Andrew Clennell, threw plenty of shots at the Premier today.
Not about the personal, it's about the professional. Why didn't you pull up Daryl Maguire in any of these phone calls? Why didn't you report any of this behaviour? He was clearly lobbying for developers while you were Premier and he was a parliamentary secretary. Why didn't you act on this, Premier?
Well, look, that's all your opinion, Mr Clennell, but I'll say this.
It's in the evidence, Premier.
But I'll say this, at all times I've acted in the best interest of this state.
Why didn't you tell your staff that it was outside his electorate, and why didn't it raise alarm bells for you that he was lobbying for matters outside his electorate? It must have, Premier. Premier, you've been in this place for 17 years. At any other time, has an MP spoken to you about getting a cut on a land deal?
Well, look, at the end of the day, we know that members have multiple interess.
Sorry, Premier, yes or no? Premier, ICAC says he has a case to answer or corruption allegations against him in 2018. He forced him out of Parliament. Isn't that the moment where professionally you have to say, I either remain Premier or I'm with this man?
Well, again, I made... please look at my comments yesterday, which I answered extensively, Mr Clennell.
Andrew Clennell joins me now. You had your angry pants on there, mate. What are you most concerned about when it comes to the Premier's behaviour when she was going out with Daryl Maguire?
Well, Chris, I spent 15 years fighting corruption in Macquarie Street. I wanted a clean state for my kids to grow up in. I believed Gladys Berejiklian was clean, and some of the revelations at ICAC have really shocked me. And
What in particular?
I'm concerned about them. Well,
what in particular?
Well, ultimately, she knew that this bloke was lobbying for developers and getting a cut as an MP. Now, tell me in any world how that's acceptable or appropriate. And you can imagine what sort of large-scale corruption could occur in those sort of circumstances. I mean, we're not in some third-world country here.
However, her knowledge
seemed to endorse it.
But her knowledge of Daryl Maguire was the fact that he was a big noter, he was a boaster, that maybe some of what he said was gratuitous. You still think you should have reported him much earlier than she did?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to buy from that evidence. It's they're getting into real specifics in terms of his commission, what he gets. I mean, who thinks that's appropriate? Who watching thinks it's appropriate for an MP on the side to do deals with developers using his government office to lobby, and that he tells the Premier about it and she does nothing about it? And in one phone conversation she says, I don't need to know that bit.
OK.
I mean, that just doesn't pass any test anywhere, Chris.
OK, but what if that doesn't constitute corruption? Why was she in ICAC in the first place if none of what they have constitutes corruption? It is merely something the Parliament needs to rule over when it comes to a ministerial conduct charge.
Well, you're saying that you need to have a corruption finding against you to resign as a Premier or Minister over scandal, because that would overturn the entire Westminster system, Chris.
No, but if she is called into a witness box, surely the ICAC can't go on a fishing expedition. You've got to know whether she's guilty of something, or at least suspect it.
Well, they had taps of her discussing these things. What did you expect them to do? Just go and hide them in the basement or something?
So do you think she's guilty of corruption?
It's not for me to make that assumption, but I think there's evidence that she turned a blind eye to corruption. Do you think premiers or prime ministers should turn a blind eye to corruption, Chris?
No, of course not, but we are in very special times, and I get the feeling from the public reaction today, both on social media and on Talkback, that they see Gladys Berejiklian as somewhat of a saviour and that she deserves a little bit of slack. Is that too much to ask? Well, you are giving her slack if that's the case. But if that's the case, can she do anything she wants and never be held accountable for it? OK, the way the numbers stand in the House, will she lose her job out of that, do you think, after 24 hours? Well, it depends on Daryl Maguire's evidence yesterday if anything else comes out. Otherwise, she won't at the moment. But there are real concerns internally about the way she's conducted herself around these affairs, especially when she's required other people to resign over allegations. And she clearly looked after this bloke, and never reported him. So that creates its own internal waves. But as you say, her popularity means you could never roll her. So there are probably people in the government who are thinking she should resign, and if she does it in 6 to 12 months, that's fine. Look, she looks diminished by this whole experience. She's not the person she was last week, from what I can see, Chris. Yeah, and I agree she's done a great job with the pandemic, great stuff. But if I'm not going to hold any punches when it comes to accountability and having a clean government in place. That's absolutely not going to compromise that on the basis of the fact you've done a good job on a pandemic. That's not how the system works. That's not how the Westminster system is supposed to work. But I get the feeling that's how the public thinks. I get the feeling that the public looks beyond Gladys Berejiklian. What, every single person in the community, or what? No, I think the majority of talkback calls on 2 radio stations I heard today, and then trawling through social media, were clearly in favour. You probably heard people in favour of her quite passionately today too. Well, let's see what emerges from Daryl Maguire's evidence. OK, if Daryl Maguire wants to save his own bacon, which I'm sure is his priority, does that mean he takes Gladys Berejiklian with him? Not necessarily. So he could still be loyal to her and defend his actions with others. I get the feeling there are probably more phone taps to be heard and he might go down. Yes, well, she's taken a risk in completely disowning the personal relationship and saying she made a mistake. It's whether or not he stays loyal to her, and I guess whether or not there's any more he can impart about her knowledge of such things. I mean, if he can't, if that was the extent of it, then she can survive. But, gee, it's messy and it's a bad look. It makes it look like she's got terrible judgment and that she... I mean, you've got to understand in Macquarie Street, Chris, there's a requirement drummed in on all staffers and all MPs whenever they see corruption to report it. And what he was up to
you know, she might not have known it met the definition of corrupt conduct, but gee whiz, if she knew Labor people were doing that, she'd be all over it.
Yeah.
So
true.
I think she had this pristine image and it's been so sullied, you know.
And I wonder whether the public, though, also thinks that if you take Gladys Berejiklian out of the picture, who the hell is going to run New South Wales as well as she can?
Well, I think, you know, to be honest, there's a number of senior ministers who are quite competent, like Perrottet and Stokes. And in terms of the pandemic, she's done a wonderful job. But so has Kerry Chan. And you still have the same people in the health department in charge, those who are in charge of the contact tracing, etc.
Andrew Connell, thank you very much for your time, mate.
Thanks, Chris.